One thing I feel like not too many Fallout fans know about is that we almost got Fallout New York, or rather that Fallout 4 initially wasn't set in Boston, but rather set in New York. And seemingly this wasn't just a concept Bethesda was throwing around, but concrete enough to actually start a design document on this, start planning out what a Fallout New York would look like. And the reason we know that is, well, this.
The first thing is for us is figure out where the hell is this game set. And it wasn't Boston originally. So it was set somewhere else, and I still have a design doc in my desk, original design doc. And in that design doc, the one holdover is the character of Nick Valentine was conceived even way back then. He was like the first character they came up with.
Emma's design doc focusing on a New York-based Fallout was one idea that the leads were floating around.
And if you're not familiar, that's Emil, who previously was the lead writer at Bethesda on Fallout 4, but since has been promoted to the design director at Bethesda Game Studios. So for me, being a Fallout fan, I think almost all of us would love a New York-based Fallout to see what they could do with a location like that, but also, and maybe I'm a little bit biased, I do live in New York, and I think just about all of us would love to see a Fallout game based on the location we live. So in this video, what I want to discuss is what this could have been. The Fallout New York that we almost got, what we know about it thus far as the lore goes, how New York stands. There's this common misconception among Fallout fans that New York is just a crater, but in reality, no, it's not. But then also extrapolate or speculate somewhat. Get a decent idea as to what something like this could be, as I actually think there's a decent chance that Fallout 5, whenever that comes out, could be a New York-based Fallout. Bethesda is a company that goes back to old ideas. We know Todd Howard had been wanting to do a sci-fi based space game since the 90s, and it's only just now becoming a reality. So if you haven't seen my video on the Fallout 5 problem, it definitely is a good tandem piece to this one. I will have it linked down below just under the like button. But otherwise, what do we know about New York in the Fallout universe? Despite New York being the best city in the world, in the Fallout universe, there's actually very little known about it, almost to a odd or weird degree, which actually reinforces my thinking that maybe this is somewhere they're planning to visit at some point. One of the most recent times we actually saw mention of New York, of course, was in Fallout 4. Right at the start of that game, you do have the news broadcaster discussing how there are confirmed hits in New York among other cities.
Confirmed reports, I repeat, confirmed reports of nuclear detonations in New York and Pennsylvania. My God.
Obviously confirming that New York was hit before Boston, because you're in Boston and no bombs dropped yet. One aspect I see quite a few people latch onto to suggest that a Fallout New York isn't possible is one of the terminals in Far Harbor's Nucleus. At this terminal, it just lists New York as gone, which isn't exactly a good sign. Although don't fret, as it actually also lists things like DC and other major cities as gone, but clearly DC is not super gone. I mean, there's a whole game set there, a lot to do. So gone seems to have its own interpretation here. Maybe it just means fairly desolate, but not completely. There still is definitely something. In Fallout New Vegas, there's actually a character that performed at some clubs in New York that was Dean Domino.
Lighting got me. And me? I've had prime billing in Europe, New York, and this gig doesn't feel like that.
He has his own backstory, but he wasn't born in New York, he just traveled there at some point. He mentions how there's quite a few people there, but that's really it. In the Fallout Bible, which is technically considered non-canon, but a lot of people still regard it as actual lore, and I wouldn't be surprised if Bethesda takes some notes from that when actually developing games in the future. We actually do get the biggest piece of backstory around New York in the Fallout universe. We know that the United Nations is based in New York City, as it is in real life, but also as tensions around the world began to rise, some of the nations started to pull out of the United Nations, and eventually it actually disbanded. And one of the most interesting pieces, we actually know in one summer, there was an extremely high demand for electricity in New York City. As such, the nuclear reactor that was powering all of this almost goes critical. And in turn, there almost is a nuclear meltdown in New York City. As a result of this, there's power rationing, some people don't have power at all, and then there's this hot summer event that goes on. So you have an extremely hot summer, but then no electricity to actually cool yourself. And following this, the city seemed to devolve at least somewhat even before the bombs dropped. And one thing that could be significant, New York is mentioned in one holotape in Fallout 76.
What is it, Moreno?
The comm. Chatter's weird. Let me...
No. Confirmed nuclear strike on New York. Shit.
Oh God, it's the end. The end!
Keep all...
I say this because Bethesda has this tendency to give a nod to or reference future Fallout locations in previous games. But otherwise, that is literally all we know. One thing that can be inferred but isn't really confirmed is the holotape from Fallout 4. On the Prydwen, the Brotherhood of Steel described their travels from DC to Boston. In that holotape, they do say this.
On the flight here, we passed city after city, buildings taller than I've ever seen, some that nearly clipped the Prydwen. And who uses them now? Mutants. Freaks. Seeing all that destruction, tens of millions dead, brought on by technology run amok.
If you do map out the flight plan from DC to Boston, it gets close to New York City. It definitely does go over New York, so it could be referencing that, but that is somewhat inferential. And something else that's super minor, we know that Nate, the sole survivor in Fallout 4, did serve in the 108th Infantry Regiment, which is based out of New York, or at least the real-world counterpart is. We don't know how it works in the Fallout lore. So New York as it stands is this weird gaping hole in Fallout lore, which does give them this remarkable ability to actually craft almost everything from the ground up. The New York City landscape would be one of the most unique for a Fallout game, having a degree of verticalization that we just haven't seen before. It of course is definitely worth mentioning. Boston did have some cities and definitely some urban landscapes. You probably know about these because you got about 20 FPS all throughout them. Even right here in the background, with mods to improve my FPS and even using a 2080 Ti, I only get 50 FPS in the city. And frankly, I wouldn't be shocked if one of the major reasons they passed on a Fallout New York right now had something to do with this, among certain other things. And of course, although the first thing to come to mind are the skyscrapers, don't forget that New York has one of the most expansive underground subway systems in the world, and even a lot of Fallout shelters. If you've ever gone throughout New York City, you probably see the little Fallout shelter signs from time to time. Even if there were nuclear explosions here, there is a large underground portion that could be explored and even taken advantage of by Bethesda. A next-gen Fallout New York could be pretty epic, giving you very tall buildings to explore the tops of, but also very long and expansive tunnels that invariably would develop communities that you can go underground to. And of course, I feel like one of the interesting parts of this, everyone assumes that this New York game would take place in New York City, which yeah, that seems like the obvious choice, but there also is the northern part of New York with Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls being right on the border of the US and Canada. Niagara Falls, of course, would provide itself as an invaluable resource to post-war operations, being able to generate a ton of clean, free energy. But also, I think it could be very interesting to explore the divide of two separate countries. In the Fallout lore, Canada was annexed by the US during the Resource Wars. But you have to imagine, some of those Canadians probably don't feel too strongly about the US itself. And seeing that explored in a Fallout New York would be something totally unique and different. Now, of course, Niagara Falls and New York City are roughly 7 hours apart, but that wouldn't be shocking for Bethesda to kind of take their own liberties when designing maps around this. It almost never is to scale. And taking that all together, I honestly am pretty hopeful that at one point we could get a Fallout New York experience. The fact that the design doc was always kept private, that it was even a frontrunner for Bethesda at one point. It's not like they're going to forget about these things. When it comes time for planning Fallout 5 or even just a spin-off game for another studio, they're going to look back on that and probably consider it yet again. And with advancements and technology, larger maps like we see in Fallout 76, and of course, 16 times the detail, how could we forget that? A next-gen Fallout New York could be the best time ever to actually give it a go. One thing I did want to mention as I was doing the research for this video, there actually is a Fallout New York mod. It's very much so a work in progress. The last update was in November of 2018. Although the mod author hasn't abandoned modding completely, he's actually moved on to work on something else, but seemingly he will return to it. You can download it right now. There are a couple of landscapes and world space that you can explore. I will have a link to it down below. And some notable landmarks have already been recreated in that. So it does give us the best glimpse we could possibly have now as to what a Fallout New York could look like. Either way though, that is the Fallout New York we almost got, and an idea of what it could be, how it could fit in, which is almost anyway. It really is a vast and very open state that they could do a lot with. And actually, just a little aside, something separate I want to mention at the end of this video. I'm currently in the process of redoing my merch store, and as such, I am hiring artists. So if you do create 2D art, t-shirts, or even some wall designs, things like that, or if you just maybe created some other stuff and you think you could give it a go, I will have my email down below. Also, shoot me an email. I'm not trying to cheap out on this or pay people the bare minimum. but I am looking to get a variety of designs on there, and hey, just in general, if you want to check out my merch or how it exists right now, although all of it's fairly old, I do have links in the description also. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, hopefully you found it informative. If you missed my Fallout 5 problem video, I will have it linked on screen at the end of this one or in the description, but with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.